Welcome to the Why Did I Get Cancer podcast. I'm Deborah Herlax-Enos, a small-town girl turned TV nutritionist and healthy living expert. I design health programs for the average guy or gal, including those average guys named Metallica. On September 1st, 2020, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I asked every oncologist the same question, why did I get cancer? But none of my doctors had good answers for me. I wanted answers, and that's why I started this podcast. I want to help you to lower your cancer risk and provide self-care tips for those in the battle. I'm getting answers, and I want to share them with you. Today's conversation with Dr. Stephen Hussey really challenged me in a lot of good ways, but also some ways where I know I'm going to have to take a deeper dive. He's the author of two books. One is Understanding the Heart, and the other one is The Health Evolution. Why is there so much chronic disease in our world? Now, to backtrack, when he was writing the book about heart health, he had a heart attack at 34 years old in the middle of writing that book. We talked a lot about why he had a heart attack at that young of an age. For him, it was very stress related. So we unpack that. But we also talked about why are people so sick today. He said, we have gone from working in fields to now working behind a desk all day where we're in unnatural lighting and exposed to a lot of blue light. We talked about the blue light that comes off of computers and laptops and phones. And he was saying there was a really interesting study done on mice. And what they found was that when they put the blue light on mice within a year, they ended up with skin cancer. So there is so much to unpack as to how we used to live to how we live now. And then Dr. Hussey had a lot of really great tips of, okay, so you live in a high rise. Here's how you can be healthier. You live on, a farm. It's going to be a little bit easier, but how can we learn to hack our health? We also talk about structured water, which is something that I knew next to nothing about. I actually asked him, can you buy structured water at the supermarket? No. The short answer is no. It's in your body. It's part of your blood. It's part of your cells. And having more structured water will make you a healthier person. So we talked also about things that kill structured water in your body and things that create more structured water. I hope you listen to this podcast. Honestly, he is a wealth of information, and fasten your seatbelts. It was a good one. Well, welcome to Why Did I Get Cancer, Dr. Stephen Hussey. And I first heard you on my friend Hilda Labrador's podcast, and I had so many questions because you talked about your heart attack at 34, which is so shocking as you were in the middle of writing a book about heart disease. You talked about structured water, the evolution of, why we're getting chronic disease. As a breast cancer survivor and thriver, I cannot wait for this conversation, especially talking about inflammation. But again, welcome to Why Did I Get Cancer?
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, let's kind of jump into the deep end of the pool. And why are we all so sick?
I think to put kind of like a 10,000 foot view on it, my first book, The Health Evolution, that's what I tried to do. This kind of big picture understanding of why are we suffering from chronic disease in the epidemic that we are, that, 100, 200 years ago, we didn't have.
Right.
And so what's happened? And in that book, I talk a lot about evolution in the Darwinian sense. And there's people that, think that Darwin got it not completely correct, but the idea that, certain either mutations that give an advantage or just, like being taller or shorter or whatever, those types of things give people an advantage. And that over time, like life, the environment that your body's in selects for that advantage. And that's how evolution happened. That's how we become what we are today. But so that, that can take many, many years. And that's the issue, is that this process of evolution, you're never going to see in a lifetime or 10 lifetimes, right? It takes many, many generations.
Right.
So the, I guess, example is there's a scientist in Russia named Dmitry Belyaev who selectively breeded foxes, which have a much shorter gestation cycle than humans and other animals. But he selectively breeded them for domestic type traits, the ones that were more likely to come up to him and be more friendly with him. He selectively breeded those. And it took him about 30 generations before he started seeing like actual characteristics change. And then it took him 50 generations before he had like basically a fox that was acting like a dog, and domesticated.
Okay.
So it takes a long time, and that's very select breeding, which doesn't happen in nature. So the point is that it takes a very long time for evolution to adapt any species to a change, right? And so if you look at what has happened, like if you look at the amount of time that humans have been here, the first evidence that we have is maybe 300,000 years ago when modern humans were here. But even then there was pre-humans that were here for millions of years before that. If you look at how long we've been here and then how long we've been living a certain type of way, it's way too fast, for evolution to have changed and made us adapted to our modern day environments. And so we can get into like the details of that, but it's like the environment has changed enough that it's not just killing us. Cause like if you put a polar bear in Hawaii, it's probably not going to thrive very well.
Yeah.
Right. If you put a polar bear on Mars, it's not going to survive at all. Right. So Mars is too much of a change. That's going to kill it right instantly. And that's not what's happening with us. We're more like the polar bear that's in Hawaii, and it's very struggling. It's struggling quite a bit to maintain health. Right. It may survive, especially if its life is made easy, like the conveniences we have of modern day life.
Right.
But it's going to struggle and it's going to suffer from disease. And that's exactly what's happened in the last, say, 10 to 15,000 years, which sounds like a very long time. But evolutionarily, like if you think about that, like 10 to 15,000 years ago, humans started agriculture, and agriculture, staying in one place, harvesting crops, developing civilizations, that type of thing. That's a very new thing for us, because if you look at the amount of time that humans have been here and you put that amount of time into a 24-hour clock, agriculture started at 11:54 p.m. So like the last 6 minutes of the day, that very small amount of time we've been living in civilizations with agriculture, eating agricultural type foods. And then even more recently, we've had changes in light environment, changes in toxin exposure, changes in activity, moving from like working the fields and being outside more to sitting behind desks, behind artificial light. And that's a very recent change. So all these changes have happened more and more recently, and there's no way that our physiology could have adapted to it. And so that's why we're seeing it. So when you study what causes chronic disease, which is why I've kind of dedicated my life to, you realize that these changes, like this artificial food, the toxin exposure, the inactivity, the artificial light exposure, these are the things that are driving chronic diseases. And this is not a theory. You go into PubMed and you type in disrupted circadian rhythm, and there's literally an article, research about that and any chronic disease you could think of, or artificial processed foods and any chronic disease you can think of. Like this is the thing. So that's how you kind of explain this big picture of why we're so sick today. But it also illuminates the path of how we go forward,
So it sounds like you're saying that it's not just one thing. It's not just, agriculture or, eating ultra processed foods. It's kind of this trifecta, if not more items, from the artificial light to the sedentary, that's all working against us.
Yeah, it's very multifactorial. I'm a huge proponent of disease is almost never caused by one thing. Even if there was one incident that seemed to like happen, that your disease happened after that, there was probably many things that kind of like you could think of it like a metaphorical bucket. Everybody has a bucket, and if the bucket overflows, you're going to get a disease process. And so just because, there's something happened that you think caused the whole disease process doesn't mean that the bucket was teetering on overflowing. And then that last thing you put in there that caused it was the thing. But there are so many things in the buckets you could have done beforehand. Right. To make that last thing that caused the disease, not be the cause of disease. So we have to think about all the different things we can get out of our bucket.
Yeah. And you'd mentioned a few minutes ago about, it kind of illuminates a path forward, seeing all these multifactorial issues. So how does somebody start?
Yeah. Well, and it can get really confusing in the health world today because there's so many, quote unquote experts and influencers out there that are telling us all different things. Right. And so, and lots of times I feel like many of those experts are very lost in the weeds of research. And I'm not saying that research is bad or that we shouldn't listen to it or that we shouldn't gain knowledge from it, or that it's not useful. But I am saying that that shouldn't be the only thing that you base your lifestyle decisions on. And I can make a very good argument against research and against like all the flaws. I mean, it's human designed, it's human created. This idea, this even the hierarchy of research is human created. So it's fundamentally flawed. But That doesn't mean that we can't learn from it. We've learned a ton from it. We've gained a lot of information from it, but you always have to apply that information in the context of logic and human history and the history of life, right? So if there's something the research is telling you that doesn't make sense to me, that there's a molecule in my body that's causing heart disease and it's called cholesterol, right? If the research is telling me that doesn't make sense to me because cholesterol has been present in the blood of humans and all life forever. And humans were eating meat, and that's literally, there's evidence that made us human, right? Like eating meat and then cooking meat made us human. So if eating the cholesterol or eating meat and eating very low carb raises my cholesterol, that's likely what it was for our ancestors. And we've only been measuring cholesterol in the context of a population that has been eating a very processed food, high carbohydrate diet. So how do we know it's not normal for humans to have higher cholesterol? And we don't. And so those types of things, you have to apply it to that kind of thing. You have to apply it into the context of that. So if there's research telling you that sunlight is causing skin cancer, that doesn't make sense to me because the sun has been around. It is literally the energy source for all things on earth. It doesn't make sense that it's also killing you. And if you look at the research that they've done to say, the sunlight's causing skin cancer, what they do is they use isolated UVB or UV lamps, and they put that on skin or they put that on animals or whatever. And they say, look, it causes skin cancer. But that is never the way it is in natural sunlight. It's always balanced by UVA, infrared, all the colors of light. So it doesn't make sense. So we have to take all that research in the context of, logic and history of humans and use that to guide our health behaviors. But ultimately what that tells us is that we've created a modern way of life that has moved us too far, just far enough away from the actual environment that humans are supposed to be in, that it's causing disease processes, causing diseases to strike us earlier in life, and those types of things. And so we have to move ourselves within the confines of our modern way of life, move ourselves back more toward that natural environment of humans, which is outside in nature, eating real food, having real relationships under natural light, all this type of stuff. That's so like when you ask yourself the question and you're listening to influencers and information out there, just ask yourself that question: is this moving me more back toward where humans were before we had all these modern conveniences and ways of life?
Okay, you guys, I'm doing it. I am doing Kim Rogers' Parify Worm Kit. I honestly have to tell you, I'm a little bit surprised by my behavior. But here's what I mean. Kim Rogers reached out to me about a year ago, and she said, I'd love to be on your podcast. And she talks about worms and parasites inside of our bodies. And I thought, hard pass, honey. And then I started doing a little bit of research, and I thought, oh my gosh, there are symptoms that can be attributed to having worms and parasites in your body. One of them is grinding your teeth, which I thought was fascinating. And then when I did interview Kim on the podcast, she was telling me that we are one of the only countries that doesn't have its citizens regularly deworm and get rid of parasites in our systems. She was also saying, if you have a pet, you've got this problem in your body. So my husband and I are doing it right now. We started, you start with the full moon. There's more details on Kim's website, but suffice it to say, what she told me is that worms and parasites are more active in our bodies during a time of a full moon. So we started a couple of days ago, I think May 13th or something. If you want more information, go to today's show notes. There is a link to check out this worm kit to see what my husband and I are up to. So silly that we're doing this, but I'm actually really liking it. I don't feel bad. Some people can have some symptoms of what Kim calls die off. I haven't experienced anything like that, but I have to say, I think I'll probably make this a, couple of times a year activity, like a cocktail party, but no, an activity. So go to today's show notes. If you click on the link, there's already a discount in there for you, and you'll see that if you decide to buy one of the worm kits. Again, I highly recommend it. I'm doing the Parify nut-free because it does have some nuts in it. So I'm doing the nut-free parasite kit, worm kit. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you try it. Yeah, so it sounds like you are hoping people rely on common sense.
Yeah, at some point it boils down to that.
It really does. I mean, so how did your great grandparents live? I mean, mine were farmers and sheep herders. And so they were outside all the time and they lived to, well into their 90s in pretty good health. So why did I get cancer, at 55? Why did you have a heart attack at 34?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Those are the questions that, I was forced to ask, obviously, when that happened. Yeah. I mean, I talking about my example specifically, because people are probably wondering that.
Yeah,
34
please do.
years old,
Right.
So at that time, I was going through a lot of stress. I'm also type 1 diabetic. I have been since I was 9 years old, which inspired my curiosity about the heart and the vascular system, because type 1s are heavily predisposed to heart disease. So I'd already done a lot of research on this beforehand. And yes, to my surprise, at 34, I'd heard probably some of the most stressful news of my life a day and a half before this happened. And I probably unwisely did my usual intense workout a day and a half later on that Tuesday morning. And about 20 minutes later, had a heart attack. 100% blockage of my left anterior descending artery. But when they went in, so I had a CAC score, which we talked about a little bit off air, 6 months prior to this, and it was 0. There was no calcified plaque in my arteries. And when they went in to place the stent while I was having the heart attack, they found no soft plaque in my arteries. They just found a giant clot that formed in my left anterior descending artery, which is the most common place for it to happen. Okay. And so, obviously I was pretty demoralized and pretty shocked and wondering what the heck was going on or why that happened. But, like I said, I'd already looked into heart disease a lot, and I had already kind of, found all the evidence and logic and everything behind this idea that cholesterol does not cause heart disease. Mm-hmm. If you look at the history of that idea and that theory, which it is just a theory that really doesn't have any sound science behind it. If you look at that, then you're like, well, this is not what causes heart disease. Yeah. Yet when I asked physicians in the hospital, because at that point I was like, okay, hands up, okay, what happened? Right. All they would say is
just seeking answers. Yeah.
Yeah. And they would just say, well, your cholesterol is high. Cholesterol causes heart attacks. And I was just like, okay. And so I would ask the next, physician, the next attending that would come in, and they'd say the same thing. And it didn't really, there was no real conversation about it, despite me, pushing back a little bit, not in an aggressive way, just being like, well, what about this or that? And they would just say, nope, this is what does it. We want you on these 5 medications the rest of your life. And this is what you do. They came in and they told me, okay, eat this processed food diet. Literally, they gave me a list of what I should eat. And it was processed foods. There was vegetable oils were on there. Fig Newtons were on there. Cookies, animal crackers, that cereal, was okay.
Yeah, because cereal is approved by the American Heart Association.
Yeah, right. Lean meats were the only meats I was allowed to have. Oh my gosh. So yeah, it was that kind of stuff, and I was just like, okay. So that 3 days in the hospital, which is much shorter than most people would spend in the hospital after a heart attack, it reinvigorated me, and I was like, okay, this is just wrong, right? Yeah. This is and it's not just wrong because of my opinion or my logic. It's like the research doesn't reflect what they're saying. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of made it my mission to kind of share this story. But what happened in my heart attack was a clot formed, right? And so when I looked into it deeper, that's what atherosclerosis is. It's not this accumulation of cholesterol. There's no evidence for that. Atherosclerosis happens when there's damage to the lining of an artery. And when there's damage from many different things, which we can talk about if you want, then a clot forms. And if it's slow, chronic damage over time, then it's atherosclerosis. It's just plaque forming on arteries, but it's clotting tissue. And when you analyze plaque, it's clotting tissue. Mm-hmm. When you look at the research, it says that platelets or fibrinogen, which are clotting factors, they modulate atherosclerosis in every single part of it. And so clotting was the issue. And a pathologic clot formed in the artery in the body that's under the most pressure of any artery in the body. So that's where it most likely happens. But it does happen in other places. Obviously, we get strokes and kidney infarcts and DVTs and things like that. But that's what happened in that coronary artery for me. And so then I went on this quest to figure out, well, how do we stop clotting from happening, or pathologic clotting? Because clotting is supposed to happen sometimes. It is, yeah. And that's normal, but your body's supposed to be able to break it down if it's too much, and just kind of heal the area.
And regulate it. Yeah.
Yeah. And regulate it. And so, what I found is that structured water in the body, which is, water has the ability to hold energy. And when it does, and it gets next to biological surfaces, it actually structures itself. into more of a gel. It's not a solid liquid gas. It's more like the consistency of Jell-O or raw egg white. And this is something that scientists over the last 100 years have discovered many different times. So it's got many different names because lots of scientists discovered it at many times. Okay. So they call it exclusion zone water or structured water or fourth phase water, or EZ or bound water, different things. But this phenomenon does happen, and most of the work today is being done in the lab of Dr. Gerald Pollack at University of Washington. And so this does indeed happen in the vascular system. We get structured water formation on the lining of the artery because the blood is about half water. And so that water forms on the lining of the artery. And it turns out that it does a lot of beneficial things for us in that sense, that help us prevent clotting, which again is what heart attacks, strokes, atherosclerosis is. It's pathologic clotting tissue. And so if you look at what causes clotting, Rudolf Virchow back in 1856 said that, what causes clotting is damage to the lining of the artery, when we get poor stagnant blood flow, and when we get elements of blood that get too sticky and clumped together. And so those things cause clotting, and that still holds true in medicine today. That's what's recognized, Virchow's triad. And so if you look at what structured water does, when it forms on the lining of the artery, it's called exclusion zone water because it's this almost impenetrable barrier. Nothing can really penetrate it. So what does that do? It protects the lining of the artery. And there's studies that show that when you build structured water on the artery, you increase endothelial health, and they increase nitric oxide production, which is a marker of endothelial health. Right. And so that's number one, Virchow's triad number one. The second thing is that they found that when structured water forms, it's very electronegatively charged. And because it cleaves off one of the hydrogens of water, one of those hydrogens is left in the middle. So we get a very negative area next to a collection of positive area. And that's a battery.
Sure is. So, yeah.
And they've shown that you can actually put an electrode into the positive and negative area and power a light bulb. And so this structured water.
Wow. That is really cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in this case, in a tube, that battery does the work of moving fluid. And they've done this experiment over and over again in Dr. Pollack's lab. So that's how blood is moved in the body, for the most part. The heart does a little bit of pumping, but mainly the blood moves by these mechanisms. And they've shown this. They've stopped the heart of chick embryos, and they've shown the blood continues to move.
Because of this battery that our body has created with structured water.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that is, doesn't the body just geek you out sometimes?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
It's crazy what
it's
it can do.
It's fascinating. And it's amazing. And learning about it, learning about structured water, not just in the vascular system, but in the body in general, explains so many things for me. But then the last thing is that all the elements of blood, red blood cells, lipoproteins, the cholesterol, they are also surrounded by structured water, or they should be. And that structured water that gives them a negative charge, that negative charge is called zeta potential. Yeah. So they've shown this in many studies. And that zeta potential, we have a negatively charged thing, and like charges to repel each other. If they get too close, they don't stick together. So if we talk about keeping elements of blood from sticking together, we want structured water on those elements of blood. And so structured water, if we do that in the body, then it prevents those three things that cause Virchow's triad, which is clotting, right? And it protects the lining of the artery. It keeps blood moving and stops it from being stagnant, and it keeps the elements of blood from sticking together. And so that's exactly what I was missing. I have rejected this idea that cholesterol causes heart disease. So I wasn't worried about that, but I didn't replace it with something else. And that's what Thomas Kuhn says. He's like, to reject a theory without replacing it with another is to reject science itself. And so that's what I did. And so I ended up in this stressful situation and was not doing the things that build structured water. And it happened. A heart attack happened, and I survived. Very fortunate, very thankful for the care team that did that. And I feel like it was my reasoning to push this message forward. It was like, this is why I'm here. This is why it happened. And so everybody's probably asking at this point, well, what builds structured water?
That's right.
How do we do that? Right.
Where can we buy it? Yeah.
Yeah. And so the thing is you don't have to buy it.
Yeah.
And that's the beautiful thing about this. And it goes right back into what we just talked about as far as bringing your body back to nature. Because the things that build structured water are sunlight, radiant energy, grounding, gentle movement or stretching of the body, all these things. So that's the environment, right? That's the environment that we've removed ourselves from. We've taken ourselves away from the ground. We're living indoors under artificial light. We're away from the sunlight. We've been told it's bad for us. It causes skin cancer. Yep. We're not moving. We're sitting behind desks all day long under all the artificial light. And so if you look at, the trend of heart disease, coronary heart disease, like atherosclerosis, when that happened, everybody's wanting to attribute it to our changes in diet, which is definitely a problem because processed foods are inflammatory. Yep. But what has really happened is we've removed ourselves from sunlight exposure, which is what's to charge our bodies, charge our structured water. And that correlates directly from when we started fluorescent lighting and moved indoors in the 50s, which is when heart disease was rising. And we had LEDs invented in the 1970s, and then we're really pushed into the environment, into our homes in the early 2000s. Then that shift there has really, the trend has gone way up in heart disease, right? And it's kind of stabilized a little bit. But that combined with the processed foods, combined with the inactivity, like that right there. And so if you ask me, heart disease, atherosclerosis, cardiovascular type condition, is largely driven by lack of sunlight exposure. Wow.
Yeah. That is and then the crazy concept. Concept. Yes.
And then the processed food diet is just fuel to the fire once that happens. And the other aspect of that is circadian rhythm, because if you damage the lining of the artery, you damage those endothelial cells, the process that triggers for the healing and repair of those endothelial cells is one, insulin signaling. So if we're metabolically unhealthy, then that doesn't happen. And two, it's our circadian rhythm. So every night we're supposed to clean house, repair, that kind of thing. And so if we're not sleeping well, we don't make enough melatonin, even if we do sleep, then we're not getting that cleaning house mechanism. And so our arteries never get the repair signal to cleanse themselves. So those things are just, once the damage has happened, then your body can't recover from it because the artificial light is disrupting your circadian rhythm. Like it all just fits so nicely together. It's just logical. Like when the research you look at and all the evidence you see matches up with your philosophy and your logic, you're just like, man, this is it. And then here's the kicker, is that people think this is maybe just a theory of mine. But after I had the heart attack, I developed atherosclerosis in my leg because of where they went in with the, where they went into the artery in my leg to go and place the stent in my heart. There was a device they used that kind of clumped that up. And so then it messed with the flow dynamics into my leg, and I developed atherosclerosis. And they tried to tell me that doesn't happen, but I've talked to many, many people who've had this done, and that's exactly what happened to them too. And so I had a 75 to 99% blockage of the artery in my leg. I couldn't walk without pain in my lower leg. I couldn't, definitely couldn't snowboard or play soccer or whatever. And so at the time they decided they weren't going to do anything about it because it wasn't affecting my day to day. I just couldn't do some of the things I liked. And they said, when you start messing with it, then it gets worse. Anyways, I did my routine. I learned some of this stuff and I did my routine. I said, okay, I'm going to get more sunlight. I'm going to get an infrared sauna, which infrared light is the most building to structured water. I'm going to start more yoga. I'm going to do more grounding, and I'm going to optimize my circadian rhythm. And that's what I started to do probably 4 months, 3 to 4 months after I had the heart attack. And a year later, that atherosclerosis in my leg was reduced to 50%. And then a year after that, it was completely normal.
Oh my gosh.
And then
massive
a year after
reset.
that, a year after that, I just got it tested, which was last May. This last May, it was still normal. And so the vascular surgeon said, well, we can't say it's better because we don't see these things get better. That's were his exact words to me. And I was like, well, you just saw it get better, and maybe you don't in the context of what you tell people and what you see people are doing.
Right.
But it clearly did get better. Why are you not curious? Why are you not saying, well, how did this happen? Let me investigate this,
Right.
It was just, okay, well,
they just
good for you.
witnessed a miracle. So wouldn't you want to know like some of the details of the miracle so you could pass it along to your other patients?
Yeah. And further, my heart, which the ejection fraction had decreased because there was some damage, and the tissue in my heart had been damaged, so it wasn't conducting the signal very well. Those things completely recovered.
Really?
Yeah. So my heart is pretty much normal again. There may be some slight scar tissue, but it's conducting signal very well. and ejection fraction is normal. So,
Ooh.
yeah, it's kind of craziness, but it goes to show like it's not just theory. It's like there's literature behind this.
Theory. Right.
There's logic behind it. Like it makes sense from a human perspective, evolutionarily, historically, and I did it.
Yeah.
So I did it using that because I didn't change anything else. Here's the thing is my stress was about the same. It may have even got worse at some point during those 2 years that I did it. My diet stayed the same. It was low carb. And then when it was low carb, my cholesterol gets high, quote unquote, which you could argue there's no such thing as that.
Mine too. Yep.
Yeah. And so with like my LDLs were anywhere from 200 to 372 during that 2 years. So that's well above what's recommended to be. And I reversed atherosclerosis while that was that way. So there's more to it than that. We gotta look deeper.
So much more to it. I'm a huge fan of the Phoenix Lift face and neck oil from the Body Deli. Honestly, I'm telling you, in the hot summer months here in Washington, which we don't get hot that often, this is what saves my skin after a half a day or a day surfing or just being out in the sun or working in my garden. I come in, I wash my face, I put on this Phoenix Lift oil, and I can't say that it's going to really lift my skin. But what I will say is it makes my skin more luminous. It does feel like it tightens and my skin is moist. And I might go a whole day with just feeling like my skin is kind of dry and itchy. I put on this Phoenix oil and I swear I feel like I just take a deep breath. My skin isn't dry and itchy anymore, and it just feels so much better. Use the code ENOS15 to get some money off. Now, I will tell you, it's expensive. I'm going to be really honest with you. It's an investment. However, I will say this bottle of Phoenix oil, which is about 2 ounces, will last me about 4 or 5 months. And then sometimes I'll even put it on my hands around my cuticles if they're feeling especially dry. So go to the link in the show notes, ENOS15 for 15% off anything you purchase at Body Deli. There's lots of good things in there. I also use their sunscreen and I also use their vitamin C serum. So all good things. So what you're saying is your process was fairly simple and quite honestly enjoyable.
Yeah.
You're talking about getting up and walking on your grass in the morning, get a little more sunlight, some movement. And you didn't say, I went to the gym 5 days a week and did a HIIT workout. You said gentle movement was helpful, right?
Yeah, well, the compression or stretching of fascia actually creates what's called a piezoelectric effect. And the piezoelectric effect is created by structured water forming on the collagen fibers of our fascia. And when you stretch that and you compress or stretch it, so like when you get a massage or someone's pushing into you, that compression will do it. But also the stretching of it, gentle stretching of it, will do it as well, creates this piezoelectric effect, which creates electrons. And those electrons they streamed through the collagen to different tissues of the body. And that's what it all is. Like you talked about inflammation. Inflammation is just basically what I call low body charge. Some people call it oxidative stress. Some people call it inflammation. To me, it's low body charge. And what holds our charge, our net negative charge of electrons, is structured water. It's like we're like a friend of mine says this often. She says that we are structured water batteries charged by the sun. That's what we are. That's what drives our processes. If we need energy to do things, we need that structured water battery to be charged. Yeah. And we need the sun to do that. If you take away the charge, you start to tend toward disorder. Those are the laws of the universe, thermodynamic laws of the universe, that energy is not created or destroyed. It's just transferred from one entity to another. So from the sun to other things or us, and that things tend toward disorder. In order to create order, you need energy to organize things temporarily while something is alive to create order. And that's what we are. If we're tending toward disorder, we're getting disease. Yeah. And so we need energy to create order. And when you remove your energy source, which is the sun, or contact with the earth, which that energy is also from the sun, or harvesting the energy from the chemical bonds in food, that is from the sun. All of this, we're all just trying to get energy so that we can maintain order. And the more we maintain order, the less disease that we have. And so removing ourselves, there's no way we could adapt to less energy, removing ourselves from that environment. So we have to go back. We can't eat processed foods. We can't divorce ourselves from the sun. We can't avoid the ground. We can't have toxic relationships, artificial light, electromagnetic fields, like all these things. Like look at our environments and you're like, no wonder we're sick. Toxin exposure. It makes sense.
It does make sense. And all these things that you're talking about are basically free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are people that don't want you to know that. They want to sell you stuff.
They do.
Which that's the nature of capitalist society.
They want to sell the cure. Right. They want to sell the cure.
And, there are some things you can buy. Like I bought an infrared sauna. So, which is very helpful for increasing therapeutically my infrared light exposure, which infrared is the most structuring to water, but all wavelengths of light will do it. And so that was helpful. I also have my feet are on a grounding mat right now. So plugged into the grounding prong, and I have grounding sheets on my bed.
Same.
Like a EMF blocking canopy. So there's some things that aren't free, but lots of things you can do are completely free. So you don't need to be super rich to do this. You can just go outside.
Yeah.
And depending on where you live, do that year round. And it's just, even if you live somewhere cold, you can still do it year round. There are benefits to cold exposure. So there's all these different things. You just have to be willing to do it. You have to kind of, devote, that time and that effort to yourself, to keep yourself healthy.
So you bring up a good point about sun. And I know you went to school in the Pacific Northwest, which is where I live now. And we don't get a lot of sun for 7 to 8 months a year. Can this still work with me going outside and it's kind of a rainy, drizzly day? And how does the sun exposure work at that point?
Yeah. So, we're all living in different areas of the world today. Whereas in reality, in the past, we didn't really travel that far. I'm talking about very, very distant past, so where your ancestors are from is kind of the color of your skin is really associated with the light environment that you were in. If you live near the equator, you probably have darker skin. You're absorbing a lot of melanin or a lot of sunlight through melanin. Whereas if you're lived farther away from the equator where there was less sun, like for me, northern Europe, Irish, Scandinavian type thing, then there's a lot less sun. And so your body has lighter skin to absorb as much sun as possible. So you have to kind of acknowledge that based on your skin color, your ancestry, and where you live today, because we live in different environments all over the place, all over the world. But that doesn't mean that the sun is bad for us. And then for places like the Pacific Northwest, where it's cloudy a lot, you have to optimize those summer months. There's 3 months in the Northwest where it stays more sunny and it's warm enough that you can go outside and do that. And you build up, the storage of that energy. And then as much as you can, try and get out there in the winter too, because even though the UVB is not as high, there's still UV light in the midday. It's just not as much. And you want to get as much of that as you can. And so then there's other things you can do. Like if you do that and you generally stay healthy, then okay, that's good enough, Yeah. But if not, if you're still suffering, or you're still, struggling with that, then there are things you could do. Like you could get an infrared sauna, and that can help boost your infrared. Okay. You could get red light or infrared light panels or things like that. You could get vitamin D lamps to help you, that kind of stuff. People oftentimes say, well, we can just take vitamin D in the winter. And, vitamin D is a steroid hormone. It's not technically a vitamin. And so you have to think about it like that. You're taking a hormone, which lots of times people say, if you don't need the hormone, then don't take it, or it can mess with other hormones. And I would advise against taking really high amounts of it or relying on that. I would much rather you get a UV lamp, a vitamin D lamp. And because a few reasons. One is that the process of making vitamin D also makes metabolites that your body uses for very important other things. So if you just give your body vitamin D, the process of making it doesn't happen. So to make it, you need cholesterol, sulfur, and sunlight. You need those things. So you have to have those. And secondly, we're talking about hormone imbalances. We're talking about the body down-regulating mechanisms to make it and kind of losing those. So then when you do get sunlight, you don't make as much. And it takes your body a while to start doing that again. Kind of like if you, people who do really low carb for a long time and then they have some sugar and it looks like they have pathologic sugar response, but they don't really. They have a physiologic adaptation, a physiologic insulin resistance. And it just takes like a day or two for them to get back to that. So
to kind of normalize. Okay.
Yeah, things like that. So yeah, we have to kind of do the best we can in the context of where we live. Now, what about that? What about someone who lives at the equator who's from Scandinavia and they're like, I'm the palest person in the world. I'm going to burn, I'm going to get skin cancer or whatever. And like I said, the studies on skin cancer and UV light are pretty flawed. There's no way there's no time ever that just UVB comes from the sun. It's always balanced by everything else. And there's a lot of very interesting studies. So there's studies that show that the people, and this was a worldwide study, looked at people who got more sunlight, had less rates of melanoma, so more UVB exposure. Matter of fact, they found that there was an inverse for like lack of UVB and there was increased melanoma.
Wow.
They also found that there was a study that found that people with melanoma already, the more UVB light they got, the less likely they were to die from melanoma. There's studies that show or that have shown that artificial blue light, so LED bulbs and fluorescent lighting and those types of cell phones, that those things induce the changes in skin cells that cause damage that lead to skin cancer. They were actually able to induce skin cancer in mice just exposing them to artificial blue light over a year.
That is really scary.
Yeah. And they looked at another study of people in the Navy, looked at people who had indoor jobs versus outdoor jobs. And the people who had outdoor jobs had way less rates of skin cancer than the indoor jobs. And those are just associations. But curiously, the people who did get cancer, who had the indoor jobs, the places that they got cancer were the places where usually you get less sunlight exposure, like on the abdomen, on the core and the chest. It wasn't on the arms and the face where they got it. It was on those places. And there's studies that show
fascinating
that the imbalance, like too much UVA light and too little UVB induces skin cancer. And guess what does that? Modern windows. Modern windows filter out the UVB, but let in the UVA. So here we are living behind modern windows, and that imbalance has been shown to create the causes or the changes that cause skin cancer. So that's what's causing skin cancer. And then the other thing is that, well, sunscreen's toxic, right? There's toxins in there, so that's going to put toxins in the skin. But what else is sunscreen doing? It's blocking UVB, and we're letting in UVA. So that no UVB letting in the UVA, that imbalance has been shown to cause skin cancer. So that's what's doing it, in my opinion, based on that literature. And based on the fact, again, go back to our original conversation, what makes sense? Humans and all life has been in the sun. We lived outside 100% of the time.
Right. There was no sunscreens. There was.
And now all of a sudden it's killing us. That doesn't make sense. There must be something else, right? Now it's not ideal to burn. That's not fun.
Right.
But if you sync your body up to the day-night cycle and you get sunlight exposure throughout the year, you tell your body what time of year it is. You tell it to be ready for more intense sun exposure. Like if you tell it early in the day when the sun has risen, instead of just waiting for it to be warm enough in the year and then waiting for it to be warm enough during the day and just go straight out into the midday sun, your body's like, we weren't ready for this.
Right.
Then you're going to burn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas like I'm super pale, but it may not look like it, but I'm the tannest I've ever been right now. And I can stay out for like an hour and a half and not burn.
Yeah.
At middle of the day. So you have to build up that tolerance, that what they call solar callus,
Yeah.
So yeah.
Fascinating. Okay. Yeah. And I've read a lot of those studies and, they're fascinating. They are fascinating, but I didn't know that about windows, that it allows in the UVA, but blocks the B. Yeah. That really makes sense.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
So, on the structured water, you talked about being really stressed when right before you had really bad news, the worst news of your life, 48 hours before your heart attack. Does stress kill structured water?
Well, there's evidence that negative emotion definitely will.
Okay.
So the work of Marusu Emoto, shows that if you express negative emotions to water, when you freeze it, it freezes like all, not symmetrical, kind of fragmented, not like a usual ice crystal would look. But if you express like positive emotions or gratitude or things to water and then freeze it, it forms perfectly symmetrical, beautiful snowflakes. So there's some effect there. There's some effect to water. Do we know exactly what it is? No, but there's some effect. And so ice is basically, it's the same kind of structural formation as structured water, but it's just without the other extra hydrogen. So ice is just all that water frozen together in that same hexagonal pattern, whereas structured water is just the oxygen and hydrogen that form the hexagonal pattern. So it makes it more of a gel. And so, we can assume, and we're assuming a little bit, that, negative emotions will interfere with structured water formation or impact its ability to do that. But there are things that have scientifically been shown to interfere with structured water formation. One of them is glyphosate, which is the herbicide Roundup.
Goodness,
which
really?
you can go to Lowe's or Home Depot right now and buy if you want to.
I know you still,
it.
Yeah. I just did a glyphosate test and I'm in the 95th percentile.
Mm-hmm.
I have so much glyphosate in my body, which I am working with my doctor to get it out. But I grew up on a farm.
Yeah.
In the 70s. Yeah.
It's crazy.
It is crazy.
So that has been shown to reduce it.
Okay.
A wireless router has been shown to reduce structured water formation.
Okay.
So those are the things we've got to watch out for. So these non-native electromagnetic fields that we're not used to being exposed to, again, very different than what we were exposed to, which the only electromagnetic field we were exposed to was the Earth and other living things.
Right.
These other ones, these new ones are not compatible and they affect the structured water. So, and anything that you can think about, you can say that it's inflammatory, right? Because what holds our net negative charge that keeps us uninflamed? Structured water. If there's anything that interferes with that, we can call it inflammatory because it's decreasing our net negative charge, making us more acidic, more inflamed, that kind of thing. So those are the things that can interfere with it. So we build it, infrared light,
right,
grounding, movement, that type of stuff, positive emotions. We avoid the things that tear it down, glyphosate, other toxins, I'm sure too. That's just the one that's been scientifically tested.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Wireless signals, negative thoughts, negative energy, that type of thing.
It sounds like you're talking about a really pleasant way to live, turning off the news, eating organic, maybe even growing some of your own food, being out in the sun. It sounds like a really good way to live. It kind of sounds like how my great-grandparents lived.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you think about it like that, like humans did that instinctively. It's the way they lived, know, and really, and again, I'm not like saying that I never read research because I read a ton. And if you read my books, that there's like 700 studies cited in that heart book, I read research all the time, but like, it wasn't until, this research, this entity that was research that started coming about, we were trying to discover things. It started out pure enough, I think, but I think that we've really got caught in the weeds. And now you got research saying all these conflicting things. Why? Because you can design research in any way you want to and get the desired effect, Now research for discovery, like, hey, let's test this and see what happens. Like, oh, that's interesting. I just learned something about the natural world. That's cool. That's cool science.
Right.
But randomized controlled trials where you try and isolate all of the factors, which is not how anything ever occurs in life. I'm never exposed to one thing at a time. So how does that tell me anything about anything?
That's right.
Like that type of stuff, we're really lost in the weeds with that. And what has happened since then, since we've been following that research? We've gotten sicker and sicker and sicker.
And sicker.
We've been told that the things that we've been eating forever, saturated fat, animal foods, getting sunlight forever, we've been told those things are bad now because the research told us so. And maybe there's nefarious people behind that. I don't know. All I know is that the more you learn, the more you know, and the better you can live your life. So we got to spread that message.
We do need to spread the message. And what I love about your message is ultimately at its core, it's simple. Mm-hmm. It really is simple. So even here, I've been sitting here for an hour. I maybe just simple tip, get up and move every hour, do a couple of stretches. I usually keep a towel nearby and I'll, kind of do some arm stretches, shoulder, back, whatever. And that's enough. It sounds like to encourage my body to make more of this structured water, which is going to protect me in the long run.
Yeah. Well, and like sitting here in my home, like I can control a lot of things, right? So I always choose to control them. So the window's open, letting natural light in. My feet are on a grounding mat right now. The blue light is turned way down on my screen. I'm plugged in. I'm not using Wi-Fi. I'm plugged in.
Okay.
My computer's plugged in. I could be standing. I'm not standing right now, but my desk does go up. I could stand and get more motion out of that. Just being standing and not creating this, because when we're sitting, we're hunched over, and that creates a lot of imbalances that interfere with like liquid fluid flow, like lymphatic and blood flow in the body. So you can always make those little decisions, and they're easy, and you're going to be sitting there anyway, so you might as well make them. But, if you work in an office or something like that, then, you can only control so much. But you always do the best you can, and you keep working toward making better changes. And that's all we can really do. And, like I said, when you study structured water and you study like life and where we've come, and it's fascinating how it illuminates a lot of different things. And so, you can relate it to pretty much every chronic disease, including cancer. Which people think is this big mystery. But I think that you can, if you look at the research, like cancer is basically when cells lose their voltage. And when they lose their voltage, they get triggered to rapidly divide. Like that voltage change is what triggers cell division. And so you can do it in a controlled way. Your body can create a phase transition or a voltage transition, or they call it an action potential. Like if you learn it in normal physiology, and that can trigger cell division. That's what does trigger it. However, if it happens pathologically, just like clotting, it happens pathologically, it becomes an issue. And when your cell loses its voltage and it stays there because it's lost structured water, it'll start rapidly dividing. So again, it explains so many things. And when you lose structured water, your cells lose their shape, and that's exactly what Otto Warburg found. It's cancer cells. They lose their shape when their mitochondria don't function. They can't build structured water. They lose their shape because the structure becomes more liquid, and so they become amorphous rather than this, kind of, solid state thing or concrete thing. So yeah, it's pretty fascinating. You could go on and on.
Yeah, you could. Yeah. I'm again, really geeking out about this conversation, and I'm curious, what advice would you give? Like our oldest daughter, she lives in a big high rise, Chicago, there's not a lot of grass, to walk on. And again, high rise, kind of inside all day. So what's one thing somebody who's living that life, what could they do to increase their structured water today?
Well, the first and foremost thing is that if at all possible, which is not possible for some, is move. Like that is, if you can do that, if you can find a way to get yourself in a better situation, then do that. Because everything else is always going to be just things that you're adding to counteract the environment that you're in. Because it's not just like living in that, you're just surrounded by wireless signals all the time.
All the time. Yep.
So, things you can do, this is where it becomes more expensive. If you're living in this environment, like obviously there's parks in cities, so you can go. I just read a study about the negative ions in air, and it's, the negative ions are one thing that brings us electrical charge, electrons that we can structure the water with. They're much higher in a city park than they are walking down the street in the city, which would make sense, but they're astronomically higher, like in a waterfall in nature. So get yourself in those environments as much as possible. Go to the city parks, put your feet on the earth, that kind of stuff as much as you can. And then like in your home, you could use things like I talked about, have the windows open, have natural light, turn the lights off, open the windows, let in the natural light. And then you can use a grounding mat for when you're just sitting around or whatever. You can use grounding sheets. You can buy an EMF blocking canopy for when you sleep. You can have your bed in that canopy. These are all, somewhat pricey things, but well worth it if you live in a place like that.
Yeah.
To mitigate these things.
Right. Because you can't control your neighbors. And
right.
we have a Wi-Fi kill switch at night that we of course utilize. But, if I lived in a high rise, You
right?
just have no idea what's
You got a neighbor
hitting your
underneath
body.
you, above
Yeah.
you, next to you, and they all got Wi-Fi. So
They've all got Wi-Fi.
you're never going to get rid of it all. But like when
Mm-hmm.
you're sleeping, you don't ever need it. So you can get a canopy or something like that, work toward those types of things, yeah. And then like at night, you're just surrounded by light, artificial light at night. So, blue blocking glasses can help with that, because that will help turn on melatonin production when you put those on. And there's definitely literature that shows that. Maybe even blackout shades, like, using better lighting in your home or apartment or wherever you are, like red light or incandescent bulbs, if you can find them these days.
Yeah.
Those are much better options, much lower in blue, because blue is what tells your body what time it is. So lots of different things that you can do to help.
Okay.
And then if you ever find the opportunity to get out of that environment, then do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice. As a country girl, I've always been a country girl. I feel like I have such easy access to things because I can walk right out into my yard. I can go out and look at the stars at night, and not everybody gets that opportunity. So I just, these are great tips to help make it easier for people who are living in the big city and can't move.
Yeah.
So that's good.
It's like logical again. It like makes sense. Like we're going back as much as you can within the confines of where you are in your modern day environment. Go back and make things more like that natural environment. And sometimes you have to use some modern technologies that we have to do that.
Yeah, love that. Well, Dr. Stephen Hussey, thank you so much. I literally knew very little about structured water or fourth phase water, easy water. And now I definitely not an expert, but it makes me excited to think about how can I incorporate some of these things into my day so that I make my body more resilient.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, again, like we all talk about how we're like a large percentage water. We know we're 70, 80%, depending on what you read, water, but water's not just this solvent that things are floating around in there. Like it's actually a huge part of our physiology. And I think it's driving our physiology and the function of our body. So we need to learn about it. And so again, as I've been learning about it, it explains so many things to me. And so, I explain it in detail in my books, all of my books, and, but Dr. Pollack, it's not necessarily a biological application of structured water, but you learn a lot about structured water in his book, which is The Fourth Phase of Water. So highly recommend that. People learn about it because it's what our world, we live on the water planet, people, like we need to know about this thing and
got to figure it out,
what it can do.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, thank you for being such a great guest on Why Did I Get Cancer? I never thought about being a podcast host. It wasn't on my radar. I was a TV nutritionist. I had a private practice and I traveled around the country speaking to people, companies and CEO groups about how to eat healthier so that they could have more energy and achieve more in their lives. And never thought I'd be a podcast host until I got diagnosed with cancer. And at the end of cancer, I just said, oh my gosh, God, what's next? Like, who's going to listen to me now? Honestly, who's going to listen to me now? I go on TV and I preach to thousands about what they can eat to not get cancer. And I felt that still small voice inside say, go look up the website. Why did I get cancer? And I thought, well, that's a good idea. That's what I've asked every oncologist. And I went and I Googled it and the URL was still available, which honestly is a miracle. God had a plan for me. And this is my mission now, is to teach people what they can do to make themselves stronger against getting chronic diseases like cancer. So here's my ask today, is I am asking you to help me to get this podcast out to more people. Here's how I found out how you do that. You leave reviews and you subscribe to the podcast. So it just downloads and goes right into your queue anytime I release an episode. This helps me, and it helps me get this message out to a lot of people who might really need to hear it. And I always say this is the podcast that I wish I would have had during cancer. And maybe I would have made different decisions in my treatment. Maybe I wouldn't have. I don't know. I don't want to play Monday morning quarterback, but What I do know is that this information is vital to get out to people so that people realize that they have options. And that's one thing with cancer. I felt like I was so many times fresh out of options. And it turns out I wasn't fresh out of options. And I wish I would have had more information, but I do now. And it is my life's work to get it out to as many people as possible. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for leaving me, hopefully, a 5-star review. I would really appreciate it. And hit that download button. Thank you. Hey, keep in mind, I'm not a doctor. And if you need medical advice, please reach out to your team. That is going to be just the best source for you because they know you. So again, I hope you enjoyed this podcast.